Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I'm Julia Gray, the Executive Director here at the Wilson Museum in Castine and the homeland of the Penobscot Nation and their Wabanaki relatives. We're so pleased today to be joined by Ellen Sedgwick, who Haley and I do work on. She's Ellen Sedgwick from Surry, not from Sedgwick. She's a local artist who creates wood-fired pottery. Ellen is originally from Chicago and found her home in Maine after going to college in Bar Harbor at College of the Atlantic. She lives and works in Surry with her husband and her 3 children. I'm going to let Ellen's going to tell you lots about her work, so I don't need to provide that kind of background information, but I just want to give a brief introduction and let you know that this program is part of the Pottery, Shaping Clay, Shaping Culture segment of our Connecting to Collection series, with previous programs looking at Wabanaki pottery and 18th and early 19th century tablewares in Castine. Both of those programs are available on our YouTube channel if you'd like to see the recordings of those, as will this program be after the fact. And this series is made possible through the generous support of Bangor Savings Bank. So thanks to them for making this program possible. And they will be continuing to support Connecting Collections as we begin several new series segments for the coming year. So welcome everyone, and I'll hand it over to Ellen.
Great, good afternoon. Thank you for being here with me, both in person and those of you who are joining on Zoom. I'm excited to share with you about the pottery and what has inspired me over the years. I first connected with making pots in a high school ceramics class. I liked the tactile quality of the material, the easygoing energy I felt in the classroom, and the bit of unknown that dwells between the making and the firing process. I attended College of the Atlantic in 1997 and was excited to be able to take another ceramics class in my second year there. I found myself spending hours in the studio and time disappeared. I had always felt pressure by my ethicist father to do something of meaning, and I thought I could do this. I could do this every day and never get bored. For me, I think pottery was one of the first places and continues to be a place where I find a connection between head, hands, and heart, or mind, body, and spirit. A requirement at College of the Atlantic is to complete a qualifying internship in order to give students a real life view into a potential career path. Although being an artist isn't a traditional career path, I was fortunate to be able to explore that possibility and to apprentice with a wood-fire potter as my internship. Jody had done a traditional apprenticeship in Japan to master potter Jun Isazaki. She spoke Japanese fluently and had designed and built her own anagama kiln based on the Bizen kilns she was familiar with. Jody's quiet, unassuming way allowed me my first connection to Japanese culture and pottery, even if I wasn't quite aware of it at the time. It was through working with Jody that I was first influenced by Japanese culture in a more direct way. I think my first exposure to Japan was through this little pocketbook of Gary Snyder's Turtle Island that I had been given in high school. I really liked the poems and I carried the book around with me. Gary Snyder has been a strong influence in my life, and I think through this little book of poems, my eyes were open to another way of being, to the idea that there was so much more than the suburban world that I had grown up in, and I was inspired to search. It just seemed so different than America and how I was brought up. Here's a little poem by Gary Snyder called Avocado. The Dharma is like an avocado. Some parts so ripe you can't believe it, but it's good, and other places hard and green without much flavor, pleasing those who like their eggs well cooked. And the skin is thin, the great big round seed in the middle is your own original nature. Almost nobody ever splits it open or ever tries to see if it will grow. Hard and slippery, it looks like you should plant it, but then it shoots out through the fingers, gets away. I was intrigued by meditation and the Buddhist and Zen aspects of Japan. I found really interesting. It opened up this whole world of being able to see another perspective, and I really embraced that. I haven't been to Japan and I don't have a very deep understanding of the culture, but from the understanding that I do have, there's an acceptance, a welcoming around things of depth that I don't see so much in this culture. You can see that reverence for beauty in the surface of the pots. They tell a story that ash can be hard and rough, it can drip, and flash, and it's beautiful. Things don't have to be symmetrical and clean to be beautiful. There's beauty in the imperfect, in the rough, in what we first might find ugly. There is a Japanese term, wabi-sabi, that refers to the appreciation of the beauty of imperfection, impermanence, and simplicity as the natural state of things in the world. Wabi-sabi finds its origins in the Buddha's teachings on the three characteristics of existence: impermanence, suffering, and the absence of self. In Japanese Zen, these are considered the qualities of all beings in their natural state. Zen values the passage of time and the reality of transience and celebrates the wisdom of imperfection, expressed by aging and incompleteness. This relationship to nature and beauty continues to intrigue and inspire me. So back to Jody's. When I first arrived there, I was immediately struck by the surface of the pots. It was something I wasn't familiar with, and I felt very drawn to it. I love the connection with nature that seemed to be present, not only in the pots, but also in the lifestyle of a wood fire potter. My daily tasks as an apprentice consisted of stacking wood, recycling clay, and making pots for the upcoming firing. I also attended a craft fair with Jody as her assistant. I found the daily life of being a potter very fulfilling. It was hard work physically. I loved being outside and the peaceful quality of the repetitive work. Making pots didn't come easily to me, and Jody set me on the task of making 1-pound cylinders again and again and again. I worked on a kick wheel throwing pots that would be fired in the 8-day firing in October. After I had reached a relative competency with the cylinders, I moved on to bowls, then mugs, and then bud vases. At that time, Jody lived in this cabin, which is now her gallery. I had already fallen in love with the daily life of making pots, stacking wood, and recycling clay, and then came the time for firing. Jody works with a crew of 4 people, all taking 6-hour shifts for 8 days. The potters come together to load the kiln over 4 days, and then the fire is lit. It was so special to be a part of this amazing process, and I was hooked. This is Jody and her kiln. While apprenticing with Jody, she shared her library of pottery books with me. I first borrowed A Potter's Challenge by Bernard Leach and would read it in the evenings after work at the Pottery. He spoke of head, heart, and hands, and there was a spirituality that came through in some way that I felt but couldn't describe. I really connected with the idea that through making something again and again without pretension, something of the self comes out. It was just 2000, and as always, the times were changing. Computers were doing more and more, and as a young person who valued realness and depth, the idea that I could make something useful that could hopefully contain some qualities of being human, and that perhaps that could touch someone else, it seemed like that mattered somehow. There was worth there. Shoji Hamada was a Japanese potter. He had a significant influence on studio pottery of the 20th century and was a major figure of the Minge, which is the folk art movement that started in Japan. He established the town of Mashiko as a world-renowned pottery center. In 1995, he was designated a living national treasure. Bernard Leach and Shoji Hamada developed a strong friendship that would change the way the world looks at pottery today. They wrote letters to each other and worked extensively together, learning and sharing pots through their own traditions, as well as setting new standards for contemporary pots. Together, they established the Leach Pottery at St. Ives, England, and built the first Japanese-style kiln in the West. There were many students of the Leach Pottery, and the ideas of Bernard Leach and Shoji Hamada became very influential, spreading to the United States, as well as Canada, New Zealand, and Great Britain. Shoji Hamada is known for the ease and childlike quality that he imparted to his work. Some of his plates. This is a jug by Bernard Leach. This is a vase by Bernard Leach and a bowl by Hamada. In 2004, I took a 2-month concentration at Penland School of Craft, where I was exposed to many great potters and artists. It was a thrilling time and fed my desire to seriously pursue the life of a studio potter. I moved around quite a bit over the next several years and found different studios where I could work, including renting space at a city studio to working as a studio tech at a community college in exchange for studio space and materials. I was exposed to many different styles and techniques and more felt the connection to wood-fired pots. It was also during this time that I started to use a treadle wheel. I noticed that the potters whose pots I was drawn to threw on a treadle wheel. This is Warren Mackenzie, who studied, he was a direct student of Bernard Leach, and then came back to America and brought a lot of those ideas with him. And he had his own whole following of students that then became very influential in the United States. One was Randy Johnston, who was a potter that I took a workshop with. So this is Warren Mackenzie. He's since died. He was like over 90 when he died. And this is one of his pots. So I wanted to make looser pots and I wanted gesture and movement. And I liked how that came through when using your own energy to move the wheel and clay. This is a pot, a hut jar from Sequoia, who was my teacher at Penland, who also used the treadle wheel. And then this is a Shino tea bowl by Randy Johnston, who was a student of Warren Mackenzie. Randy also studied in Japan with Shimoka, who was the neighbor to Shoji Hamada. So he had the influence of both the Bernard Leach and Hamada pretty second hand. So pretty neat. I found plans for a Leach wheel, signed up at a local woodworking studio and began building my own wheel. It took months to complete, and although I no longer throw on that wheel, I did for several years. After moving around a bit, I felt I wanted to submerge myself again in the life of a wood fire studio potter and sought out an apprenticeship with Kevin Crow in Virginia. Kevin had a Nobori Gama, which is a multiple chambered kiln, and made pots I found loose and exciting. I was with him for just over a year and 3 firings, and then I planned to earn money for a year and move back to Maine to buy land and build a kiln. It was during this time that Matthew, my now husband, and I fell in love, and in 2010, we moved to Maine together. We first rented an 1812 cape that cured my love for old house living over that winter. I set up a makeshift studio and was pleased to be able to join Jody once again in a few of the firings. The plan was to buy a house and land enough to build my kiln. Due to our financial situation, buying a home was not a straightforward process, and we spent over 3 years looking and waiting and looking and waiting and waiting until we were able to purchase our home in 2016. It was a dream come true, and it had a perfect pottery studio. Planning what kind of kiln I would build had begun abstractly while working and firing with various wood fire potters and kilns. As I was able to spend time with the kiln and the pots that came from it, I started thinking about what kiln I would build. I wanted to build something that wasn't so big that it took thousands of pots to fill, because I just don't work that way. I wanted the surface of a longer firing, as the flatter surface of a shorter firing doesn't have the depth that appeals to me. I also needed to build something big enough that it was worth firing for several days. This is a mini Gama, which is very mini. Probably just takes a few hours to fire. The Japanese wood-fired ceramic book was my Bible, and although my kiln was my own design, I referenced the book constantly as a guide. With 2 young boys and us both working full-time jobs, my life was pretty full. Even though we now had our own place, the reality of actually building the kiln felt far away. With little money to purchase materials, I sent out a letter to friends and family asking for contributions towards the project, and in exchange, they would receive pottery from the kiln once it was built. I am so thankful for all of the support that I received. I started the groundwork for the kiln in 2018. Things moved slowly, clearing the site and building the kiln shed. Our neighbor from our previous house so kindly worked with me in planning and building the shed. He gave a lot of his personal time to help, and I am so grateful to him. During this time, we found out that I was pregnant, so that changed things a bit. Sabine was born in February 2019, and I continued work on the kiln that spring. Here's Matthew and Matt working on the roof. Once the shed was complete, the foundation of the kiln needed to be dug. An Anagama kiln is usually built into a hill using the natural slope for the advantage of draw during firing. The kiln is stepped to accommodate for the elevation. We didn't have a big enough hill to dig right into, so instead that depth had to be created. After hand digging the footprint of the kiln itself, I realized that we needed a staging area to work the kiln that would need to be nearly 2 feet deep to line up with the front of the kiln. At this point, I rented a mini excavator to help get the job done. I also rented a compactor for the area beneath the shed. Once the footprint was set, I laid concrete bricks as a floor for the staging area and built a wall with cinder blocks to abut the dugout earth. So that's the kind of retaining wall there, and that's a staging area where we work when we're firing and loading the kiln. Once this part was complete, I could begin the floor of the kiln, which is 2 hard fire bricks thick. Thanks to generous donations, I had 3 pallets of fire bricks on hand that I had already purchased. The bricks were delivered to the end of the driveway or the road and then hauled by the wheelbarrow to the kiln site. In the end, I think over 5,000 bricks were used, each brick costing over $2. Thanks again to the donors. For the floor, each brick needed to be leveled before moving on. No mortar was used, just sand. The front of the kiln is the firebox. It's 3 feet in length with a grate for embers and to help with airflow. After this was complete, I continued to work towards the back of the kiln. I had laid about half of the floor before winter set in. This was 2020, 2021. It was the pandemic and I was home mostly with our 3 children. Progress on the kiln was slow. In early 2021, I had the thought of getting an intern from COA. I could really use help, and I thought about how my internship with Jody had created my life path, and the possibility of providing that opportunity for a student felt good, a way to give back or continue perhaps. I messaged with the internship coordinator who had been there when I was a student 20 years ago and put together a proposal. The day the posting went live, my phone was exploding. There was so much response. I ended up interviewing several students and selected Ella Raylick Godino for their tenacity, skill set, and interest. It was March and Ella would begin working with me in June for the summer, helping to build the kiln in the mornings and making pots for the firing in the afternoon. It was a complete act of faith on Ella's part, doing an internship with a not yet established potter and a yet to be built kiln. Many thanks to Ella, who has made my life all the richer. When the weather warmed and the ground was no longer frozen, I continued working on the floor. Once the floor was finished, I started on the walls. From here on, every brick needed mortar, a 50-50 mix of fire clay and silica sand. This I mixed in batches by hand in a wheelbarrow. I had laid a few courses of the walls when Ella began their internship. It was mid-June and we had the summer ahead of us. This is the wall starting to go up. That's Sabine, who's now 2, and our cat Ruskin, who likes to hang out around the kiln. Ella and I clicked right away. We worked well together. Our pace was equal and we each took one side of the kiln and lay a course and then switch sides. The hours dissolved with conversation and the endless rhythm of laying brick after brick. The wall courses were going pretty smooth, though soon we would need to start bringing them in to form the arch of the kiln. When I first heard about the catenary arch, I knew that was what I wanted to use for my kiln. It's the inverse of the natural curve that describes the shape of a flexible hanging chain or cable from 2 fixed points. Flip that curve over and you have a catenary arch. Catenary arches are self-supporting and very strong because they redirect the vertical force of gravity into compression forces that press along the curve, holding the arch's building blocks in place. We found the arch shape measuring from the distance between the walls and the height of the kiln. We then marked the curve on plywood using a chain from the distance points. The nature of an anagama kiln is to widen in the center and taper in the back like a flame itself. The largest part of the kiln in width and height is in the middle, so we had to create 3 different arch forms and then attach them together with wood slabs. Luckily, Ella is rather handy and had done a fair amount of carpentry work. They also had built a frame using a similar concept to build a canoe. When the frame was finished, we went back to laying bricks, but now we would bring them in to rest on the supporting frame, thus creating the catenary arch. We made good progress, but it was fall now and Ella's internship was over and the kiln wasn't finished. Ella continued helping 1 day a week that fall as an independent study, and I worked like crazy to finish the kiln for a fall firing. There was still so much to do, but I was closer than I'd ever been. I launched another campaign as I was out of materials and resources.
Hi, I'm Ellen. I'm a studio potter and I've been making pots for over 20 years. I'm currently building a wood kiln here on our property. This has been something that I have been thinking about and planning for a long time, and it feels so incredible to really see it taking shape. I'm grateful for all of the support that I have had so far. The kiln itself is nearly complete, just a few more courses of brick to be laid. I still need bricks to build the chimney and materials to insulate the kiln and stack the pots when it's time to fire. My goal is for a Thanksgiving firing. Any support that you can give is so wonderful. Thank you for helping make my dream come true.
As the bricks came together to form the arch, it became more and more challenging to fit the empty spaces. I used castable to fill the final spaces, and then the arch was complete. It was on my birthday, October 21st, that we removed the frame. I was relieved that the kiln was still standing. This felt huge, but I still had to build the back wall, flue to the chimney, and the chimney itself. And the entire kiln had to be insulated with KOL and a capping mix. We were all pretty excited that day. The site itself needed to be leveled again and the kiln buttressed with dirt and rocks. We had a Saturday workday to take care of these things, and then it was on to the flue and chimney. This is beginning the flue, and there was red bricks around the base of the chimney just to add extra support at the base. It's the flue going back to the chimney, and then that's the flue complete, and you can see the base of the chimney. Looking back on it, it really seems so amazing that it all came together. Emma, who had worked with me for her senior project the spring before Ella arrived, came to help for a few days with the insulation and later the firing. We cut KOL blanket, a highly refractable material, into pieces to cover the kiln and secured it with chicken wire. I rented a concrete mixer for the capping mix, which was 6 parts perlite, 2 parts fire clay, and 1 part Portland cement. We mixed in batches, and at the end of the day, when Emma and Ella were done, only about maybe 15% of the kiln was covered. I was feeling pretty defeated. Thanks to a few local friends who came to help and to Matthew for getting supplies, I was able to finish covering the kiln in a few more days. Yay! Now I had 15 feet of chimney to lay. As the chimney got taller, I had to rig up a system to get the bricks and mortar up by myself, or up to myself. I had an extension ladder and some boards I laid across the eaves to put my supplies on. It was a bit scary being so high up with not much to stand on and heavy bricks. Ella came and helped me get through the end of it. Again, so grateful for Ella. Now it was time to start glazing. I had decided which glazes I wanted to use, and Emma had done the dry mixing of a few to get us started. I mix all of my glazes by hand, and they are sieved through a 60 mesh sieve, which depending on the viscosity of the glaze can be quite time consuming. We had a Shino, tea dust, blue Celadon, and a couple of slips. Also oxides for decoration. Emma came to glaze her pots and help with kiln prep in the beginning of the loading. She set up camp on our screened-in sun porch. It was November, and she glazed well into the night. We prepared the furniture, the bricks and the kiln shelves, with a refractory mixture of alumina hydrate and EPK, which is Edgar plastic kaolin, and this mixture is called kiln wash. These are the shelves. This helps prevent the pots and furniture from sticking together from the melted ash during the high intensity heat of the firing. Once this was complete, the kiln was ready to be loaded. When I brought the first pots down to the kiln to be loaded, I was alone and I couldn't stop smiling. I was so happy. I really love the loading process. For so many firings, it had been someone else's kiln and I had watched, rarely doing much of the actual loading myself. Now for the first few days, I was doing all of the loading myself. It's very mathematical, figuring out what height and width the shelves should be depending on the pots there are to put in and the area there is to work in. It's a slow process as the pots need to be handled with the utmost care. It was so exciting to be making decisions and be actively doing something that for so long I had watched, but I was getting very tired. The kiln shelves are really heavy and the constant in and out of the kiln was wearing on me. Thankfully, Ella was able to help the last 2 days of the loading. The kids did some glazing on their pots. Once the last pot was in, the door needed to be bricked up. This was a bit of a puzzle, but I got through it, and then the fire was lit. I would keep the fire going now for 2 days, preheating the pots and driving out any residual moisture. Emma arrived on the second day of the preheat, and we celebrated with s'mores at the kiln that night. Thanks to Peter Buritz and his son Rory, who fabricated a door and tools for me. They arrived and I cast the center of the door with castable, and then Emma and I switched it out for the makeshift one we'd started with. It was Thanksgiving and we set up a table by the kiln. What a special Thanksgiving, sharing with Ella and Emma and the first firing just starting. Shifts started after the meal. Each of us would take a 6-hour shift continuously for the next 3 days, slowly gaining temperature until the kiln was over 2,000 degrees. We fired through the night and took turns cooking meals. Matthew helped tremendously, taking a few days off from work and being with the kids. We had our first snow of the year. With such a focus on completing the kiln, the wood hadn't been paid enough attention to. And at the end of the firing, all we had left was big, wet wood. We struggled to gain temperature and finish when we ran out of wood. We didn't quite get to temperature in the back of the kiln, but I have come to appreciate the surfaces that came out of that firing. When the firing was over, we were exhausted. We parted and I tried to enjoy the week off from the pottery. A week later, the kiln had cooled and we joined back together to unload. It was gratifying to see all of the pots and to take them in, remark their surfaces. The following day, we worked cleaning up all the shelves and furniture. And then it was over. The first firing was complete and now it was December. One of the things that I like about wood firing is the cycle. Due to the nature of the size of the wood kiln and the energy it takes to fire them, the potters that I had fired with fire twice a year, in the fall and in the spring. The firing cycle creates a work rhythm for the potter. Wood must be processed and stacked. Pots must be made. This is generally a focus for a few months. And when the making is complete, the glazing process of mixing the glazes and glazing the pots begins. This can take a couple of weeks. And then the loading and firing is about a week. There's the cooling period, the unloading, and the cleanup. As well as cleaning the kiln furniture, each pot needs to be examined by the potter, the rough spots sanded, and then washed clean. This takes quite a few days. And then pots are readied for sales and shows. And the cycle starts over again. With each firing, there is more learning, and I'm always thinking about why something happened and what I want to explore next time. I bring that focus into the next cycle. I love the different aspects of wood firing and the connections that I feel through them. The physical connection with the elements is so present. I love how making pots is such an individual experience, and then how we come together as potters to collectively fire our pots and to support each other in that process. I love the connections that I have made with COA students. This is Emmy, who did her internship with me in 2022 and participated in 2 firings. She is delightful and spent countless hours chainsawing cedar and sieving rice hull ash. And of course, I love the pots. I hope that my pots can bring that life to others. Right, and that's the end. Thank you.
How long to build the kiln?
I mean, from start to finish, it was about 4 years.
That's a
Yeah.
long time.
Yeah.
And then You don't biscuit fire these pots.
No, everything's
It's water
fired.
fire.
Yes,
Oh, so you really have to do it carefully in the beginning.
that's right. That's why we do the preheat. So just
Right.
really slow, and then the pots go through bisque, and then the glaze firing all in one firing.
And how many cords of wood do you use?
It is generally about 3 quarts per firing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a fair amount.
Yeah, I blend soft and hardwood. You get different surfaces from the different type of wood you use. Yeah.
And then it must be so hard to wait a week to see.
It is so hard. That week is so hard for me. I'm always like trying to peek in, telling myself not to pull things out. So,
That's a long time for you to pull down.
yeah,
If you open too soon, you're gonna crack it.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Well, but I bet your kids love it.
they do. Yeah, it's kind of like normal for them now.
Well,
So
of course. yeah,
they're like,
that's
they were
right.
super excited to make pots and glaze them, but now they're kind of like my studio, but the other ones are kind of like, yeah.
Well, quite an adventure.
Does where the pots are in the kiln affect how they end up looking?
It does, totally. Yeah, so the flame is going, the front part is just firebox, so there's no pots. And the fire gets huge. So when you're opening the door, it's like the coals can be up to, chest high. And so the flame is there, and then it's moving through the kiln. So the front of the pots will have like a kiln or a flame face, and then the back is usually not touched by the flame in the same way. So it's like a quieter, darker side. And then we also do put wood in through the sides at a certain temperature. I didn't really go into that in the presentation, but it's called side stoking. So there's ports in the side of the kiln, and we put wood in. So along those ports, the pots get really ashy. Yeah, and so that's part of it, is like what clay, I use different clay bodies. So what clay body is gonna do in what place in the kiln. Yeah, more like pots that are gonna be used for eating out of, like mugs or bowls. I don't want them to have really high crusty ash in them. So trying to place those in places where they'll be more protected. Yeah.
So now, how many times have you fired the kiln?
I've done 3 firings.
3.
So we did, the first firing was fall, but it was almost winter. And then we did last spring, like a June firing. And then we did a firing early November this year. So then I'm planning for a June firing.
So are you feeling like you're getting to know your kiln better?
I am,
And where things really should go?
definitely. Yeah.
So was Jody able to come along at all when you were doing it?
She
I assume
hasn't-
She made her own kiln.
She
also,
did, yeah. She has not visited. I think she's been wanting to, but we haven't. We've seen each other and emailed a little bit, but she hasn't actually seen the kiln. So, yeah. And her kiln is much bigger. Mine's 12 feet. Hers is like 24
Mm.
feet. Yeah. But like I said, I didn't want something that took thousands of pots to fill.
Right.
I just
Does
don't
she
work
have
that
other
fast.
potters come and bring their pieces to fire?
She does. She has like a team of 4, including herself. So everyone brings, and that's what I've been doing too. So people will come and bring their pots and help. Yeah.
It's such I think my traditional thinking of like making pottery is a very solitary thing. And this
Mhm.
is like, there's so much of this that's been like a community thing.
Yeah.
That's really
Yeah.
cool.
I like that aspect. Like you work alone and then you all come together and share and support each other. Yeah. And like the kiln, I wouldn't be able to fire it by myself because it fires for, 5 days, including the preheat. And I can't do that alone. So, yeah.
Definitely takes dedication and a mapped out schedule, like you said.
Yeah. We set up shifts and we put out like a food plan, and people sign up for meals, and it's fun. Yeah. It's a really happy time. I always feel really sad after the firing's over.
So, and have you been able to source any local plant?
Yeah, I actually had, for the last 2 firings, I had gotten some free wood. Somebody who just had like extra slabs. They had their own little mill. And so we were going there and getting like truckloads of it. It was like 12 to 14 foot cedar slabs. That's where Emmy came in. She did spend a lot of time chainsawing them into like 2 foot lengths.
Oh, that's nice.
So yeah, that was super helpful. And that was nice because the wood was free. But I also do buy cord wood
But,
So-
but also, is there any local clay?
Oh, clay. I'm sorry, I thought you
Yeah,
said
that's
wood.
okay.
There are a lot of, or there are some potters around this area that use local clay. The local clay isn't to the temperature that I fire to. So I fire really high. It's too low. We actually tried out a pot that someone had made with it and just completely melted, like completely melted. So I'm curious in using, trying to use the local clay in slips. So just using it as a decorative feature, but I can't just use it straight. I might be able to like mix it with some other things to get it more high fire, but yeah.
Wabanaki, when Wabanaki folks using that local clay to make pots, it's fired just in like a,
Like a
Coal
pit
pit.
firing,
Yeah.
yeah,
Very hot.
yeah, and it's, that's why, that's why it is the way it is. It breaks the way it does. It breaks down the way it is, which is a low fire.
Yeah.
exactly.
And it needs a temper, it almost always has a temper in it as well. It's
Right.
fairly substantial.
Yeah, and that's one thing I personally really like about wood firing is that it is high fire, so it's as high as you can really fire clay, and it makes the pots more durable. They're food safe without anything on them, just themselves. They've been vitrified. Where if you use lower, like terracotta, or even just lower electric fired, like cone 6, you have to put a clear glaze on things to make it food safe.
Right.
So, and the pots do tend to be more sturdy. I have been trying to work on kind of making lighter pots because I keep getting feedback of these pots are so heavy and I don't want them, I want them to feel comfortable in the hand. But they also need to be somewhat substantial. Otherwise they won't hold up to the fire. So if you have a really thin walled pot, it's going to warp or break. So there is that aspect where it has to be somewhat sturdy.
And the wheel you use, a treadle wheel is easier than a kick wheel, right? Because a kick wheel,
Yeah.
you're really having to.
I find it so. I mean, you are constantly having to kick it, but there's a rhythm to it and it's very reactive. So
But a treadle, it's less, isn't it easier on you than? a
I think
kick
it is
wheel?
easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, personally, I do.
Yeah.
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 So a treadle wheel is easier than a kick wheel?
I find it that way. I'm not sure like everyone would agree with me on that, but yeah.
When I used to do pots, I wanted to go to Japan, but I wanted to go to 16th century Japan.
Yeah, I know.
I didn't want to go today, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because their whole culture is so involved. with
They have
pots,
such a culture
right?
around pots and they have, it's like the pots all have a purpose. Like you eat, there's a bowl made for rice, there's a bowl made for tea, and we don't have that in our culture. And so I love that kind of focus around the pot made for the specific type of food. It's really a part of their culture in a way that we don't have that here in the United States.
Well, our Zoom audience is very engaged, but they don't seem to have any questions.
Okay.
So they're smiling away over there.
They don't get to see the actual, they come in person, they would get to see the actual.
Actual pots, yeah.
Maybe show them. No, you don't do that. Yeah. take one field trip. At the end. Okay.
Well, thank you all for being here with me and
Yeah,
sharing in
thank
my
you.
love of pottery.
I'm glad how you were very realistic about it. So- Well, let's think about it for a minute, kids.
I do think, I mean, if you have, like, my time was 100% on the kiln. I had kids, they were home, they weren't in school because of the pandemic. We also had other jobs. So, I mean, people that are just focused on the kiln can definitely build it. And if you have the resources, that was also another thing I'd run out. We'd be like, oh, we have no more bricks. What are we gonna do? So, yeah,
You do this full time now?
I do. Yeah. Yeah, which has been really exciting, shifting from, not being a full-time potter to being a full-time potter. So, yeah,
Good luck.
thank you.
These are all for sale.
You can, I love the, so Ellen, which side is the fire side and which side is the like shadow side on the one like this?
Yeah, so this
this is like the flame
Okay.
face. There, also with the wood kiln, you get reduction and oxidation. So this is a more reduced side. This is more oxidized. So that's a quality in the pots.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get shells.
Okay.
You can put shells down and
Yep.
then you would fire another pot on top.
Okay,
Do
cool.
summer.
So he had this special plate for parade. that he
Yeah.
had been saving up, and he mixed up a whole bunch of them. And it wasn't the one he thought it was. So they started firing.
Well, thank you everyone for coming and for going on this little mini field trip with us. We hope you enjoyed the presentation.